Welcome to Pharmacy View podcast, where we provide regular interviews with pharmacists and key people within Australian pharmacy and the associated global industry. In this stream of podcast episodes, we discuss with our guests the full scope of leadership tools that go into building the pharmacy leader's toolbox for team and career success. I am your host, Chantelle Turner, pharmacist, leadership coach, and founder of Turn Pharmacy Leadership. My guest today is proudly brought to you by Shopfront Solutions for all your shelf and digital marketing needs, part of the Arion Technologies Group. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Pharmacy View podcast. Today, I am very excited to introduce our guest, Marta, who is a pharmacist and runs her own business, Fusion Health Space. Now, Fusion Health Space is a pharmacy workflow and design specialist company who helps people or pharmacies to, optimize their workflows and optimize patient times and wait times, but Marta's going to tell us a lot more about that. So before I can keep waffling on, welcome, Marta. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Chantelle. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Fantastic. So I started to give an introduction to your business and realized that you're probably going to be much better at that than I am. So can you tell us a little bit about Fusion Health Space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I sort of started Fusion Health Space earlier this year. Returning to an area of pharmacy that I am super passionate about, and that's working with pharmacies to try and, like you sort of alluded to, redesign their layouts, rework their workflow, and there's much more to it, I guess, than just looking at a floor plan and a design, which is what most people think about when you talk about design of an internal space. It's looking at sort of a holistic view of the operation, the people working within the space, the functional things that the pharmacy wants to do, the services it wants to provide, and how we sort of, I guess, put the Tetris puzzle of what the physical environment needs to look like to support and optimize that operation.
Yeah, great. Tetris puzzle. I reckon I'm gonna park that and going to come back and see what parts of the puzzle that there might be that we haven't actually thought of. So before we get there, tell me what led you into this space. How did you get here?
So I worked as a community pharmacist for about 10 years as my primary role. I call it a bit of soul searching. I moved around a lot. So I worked in Tassie, Victoria, North Queensland, worked in a variety of different pharmacy models, discounters, medical centres, shopping centres, all that jazz, and really enjoyed rural pharmacy. That was probably one of the highlights of my career. And then decided I wanted to do something that was related to business. I was always really interested in the business side of things, but just not at time and place to buy a pharmacy. So I went back to study and did an MBA. And during that time, actually joined WILAC and as a consulting pharmacist, working with the team there, doing training on implementation of the WILAC systems, be it the automation or the shelving, and optimizing the layouts for efficient dispensary workflows. So it was a really interesting job. And I stayed with that business for 11 years in a variety of roles, and then went to work for a digital health tech company for a few years, and then decided I think that my passion was really more closer to that sort of pharmacy workflow, operational consulting aspect, training aspect, working with pharmacy teams. So, hence Fusion Health Space was born earlier this year.
Yeah, right. So I guess hearing you talk about that, Fusion takes on a bit of a different thought in my process. So can you explain why fusion, just out of curiosity?
Why the word fusion? Yes, because I think, I guess I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, that design is not just, drawing a few rooms and the layout. I think pharmacy is particularly community pharmacy is such a unique environment. If I look at it from a sort of higher level, you've got the pharmacy regulatory aspects of it, you've got building code aspects of it, you've got a consumer in a retail environment that needs to be supported with their expectations. You've got the operational logistical functions of actually having a dispensary in that environment as well. So I think it's sort of like it's a blend of all those aspects when you put that Tetris puzzle together to make sure you've covered off and taken all those elements into consideration.
So Marta, as you know, I'm interested in leadership, the leadership component of community pharmacies. And speaking from personal experience, I know that there was some parts of the design in the pharmacies that I've worked in that really helped to optimize workflow, but also make my life as the manager easier. And then there was also some parts that had been, dare I say it, poorly designed. And it didn't only impact the workflow, but it impacted my capacity and my team's capacity to be efficient. So are there any kind of general rules or things that you see in pharmacies that help or hinder managers, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Sort of links back to something we were talking about before the podcast, actually, and I think it's never a cookie cutter approach. And I have spoken to pharmacy owners or sort of smaller groups that have sometimes said, "Oh, we want to really standardize things." And whilst I appreciate I guess the economies of scale and efficiencies around standardizing, one pharmacy is not the same as another pharmacy, even sometimes within the same group, same ownership structure, same banner. And I think it's really important when you create a space or work with a particular pharmacy to understand sort of the layers that make that pharmacy up. So what are, like, obviously the objectives, what's the team like, even what are the opportunities for the business in that area, and creating, even if we talk about a basic dispensary layout and, where the scripts are receipted and taken in, where the scripts are processed, where the scripts are given out, that might work differently if you have, 3 pharmacists on the team, 1 pharmacist on the team, you're open extended hours. How do you create the space so that it works? If you're open from, say, 8 a.m. till 10 p.m., how do you know that space is going to work when there's only 1 pharmacist and maybe 1 support staff member versus when it's the peak time in that pharmacy and you have 3 pharmacists, 2 techs and 4 staff out in the front of shop? So we try and sort of work through, what is it going to look like in quiet times? What is it going to look like in peak times? How does supervision of the space work? Because as you know, you might be working with an awesome tech, but you still need to be able to check the script and still keep an eye on what's happening in the, scheduled medicines counter and have ear range with other conversations that might be going on. So it's really, and I guess that's where we feel our point of difference is, because we've come from so much work within the pharmacy space, knowing to ask those questions to understand what happens in that business today, but also where does the owner want to take that business, so that we're factoring into account, if they come in and say, look, we're actually going to bring on 2 extra pharmacists and we're going to create all this stuff, fantastic. How is that space then going to support that, that operational aspect?
Yeah. Okay, great. So it's designing for the team at hand, but the team that may be coming as well.
Yes, in some cases, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's about the objectives, right? So the conversation starts, what do you want to do with your business? Where are you at now? Where do you want to be in 2 years' time, 5 years' time? It might be that this project for someone later in their career, this is their final hurrah project. They want to really create a legacy with a pharmacy they want to recreate, and in 5 years' time perhaps sell or retire or pass on to a junior partner or something like that. It might be that this is someone's first pharmacy. They've had it for a couple of years and they're really excited to build it and grow it, and they bought a diamond in the rough, and they can see a lot of opportunities. So even as far as having designs where you stage that process, so you go, okay, well, your budget is this, your script numbers are this at the moment. You're not putting in a automated system as a good example, but that there is capacity in your business. If you do a couple of things, create a consult room, and you've got a great vision that in 3-5 years' time, your script volume is going to grow in this trajectory. Let's factor it in so you don't have to rip everything out and do a massive shop fit again in 5 years' time. You can do a bit of sort of a retrofit. So there's really, there isn't a one size fits all. That's why I'm never too keen where people say, oh, we want something that we can then replicate 10 times. You can create elements that you can replicate, but I think it really is an individualized approach that we prefer to take each time.
Beautiful, beautiful, like leadership should be. So you've spoken about this objectives a few times. It's come up quite a few times already about the owner's objectives. So I know when I'm onto a good thing in my brain, I can tend to run ahead and expect people to understand what's going on. So while I'm sure that you can tease these ideas out of owners' heads, what other things should owners be thinking about when it comes to, I guess, thinking about these objectives, and I guess also thinking about their team and what should they know about these objectives too?
This is a passion topic of mine, Chantelle. How much time do we have again?
As much as you need.
Look, you've really touched on a really important thing. And, if you had phrased that question, what makes for some of the most successful projects I've seen over the last 14 years working in this space versus the ones that have struggled, the answer would be very similar. I think communication, and I know it's such a, kind of like it's been a word that's been flogged to death, I think, but it's the number one thing I think that is consistent throughout the projects. Like I said, if I reflect back all the years that I've been kind of in and around this space, the most successful projects that have hit the ground running from day one of opening and have been really, quick in getting all the successes and business benefits that some of these things aim to achieve have been the ones where the owners or leaders within that business have been great at communicating. And you're exactly right that it's not, I think, something that's done intentionally, but let's for, as an example, say the owner's gone to a conference, they've spoken to their peers, they're really excited, they've got a little bit of an idea that they want to take their business and do it, tweak it, change a few things, maybe add some consult rooms, try a few services. They see an opportunity for expanding with compounding lab, for example, just a couple of generic examples. They come back from the conference, they're all energized, they call their mate 3 suburbs away, he's got a pharmacy, they talk to their business partner, they go, yep, we're going to do this, fantastic. They might come in and do a couple of shifts in the pharmacy, they'll talk to the pharmacist in charge, oh, we're going to do this. But that messaging and the excitement and the reason, the why, and I know I listened to a presentation you did, the why are we doing this? It's so important. Doesn't filter down through the whole team in the organisation. And that, of course, is, the whole start of the change piece, isn't it? People don't understand, they're not sure, they get nervous, they start worrying, particularly with, I think, the vibe in the industry at the moment. If I was working as a part-time assistant or maybe a junior tech and I kind of had whispers of things aren't great in the industry, and then the owner came in and said, oh, we're going to get a robot and we're going to do a whole overhaul of the pharmacy, the first thing I'd probably think is, oh, crap, I'm going to lose my job potentially. So I think to sort of nip it in the bud with fear, to get the team engaged, to get them excited, to bring everyone along the journey, communication is so important. And just remembering that people aren't mind readers, and if you're excited and you have this vision, you've got to communicate that effectively. And the best examples I've seen of managers and leaders, sort of the area that you work in, is where simple things. They've had a WhatsApp group. They've had a staff meeting. Maybe they don't have regular staff meetings, but they've decided this is a big project. We're going to make it a big deal. So we're going to have a staff meeting. We haven't had one for 12 months, but we're going to have one to show everyone this is an exciting big deal. And make it sort of a really positive thing. So create that sense of positivity around the change. Because I think if you think about, and please feel free to cut this out if I'm rabbiting on for too long. If you have the customer that comes in and say they're work Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and they only come to your pharmacy every other month on a Saturday, and the only staff they interact with perhaps are the juniors that come in on a Saturday and are working in the front of shop space, and they love the staff, they have a good relationship with them, and they happen to say, oh, Chantelle, see, there's a bit of stuff going on at the back. What are you doing? And they get a bit of a shrug of the shoulders, or a bit of a, I think we're doing like something. I think a robot's coming, or we're rebuilding the back end, or we're putting a lab in, and it's a little bit grey. That doesn't portray a really good impression to the customer. And I think reinventing your pharmacy, particularly with a lot of clients that we work with that do these refits because they want to increase services, they want to increase the experience for the patients. Those conversations are a fantastic opener to promoting why you're doing this. Yes, we are. We're doing a refit because we really want to focus on patient experience, and we want to provide better services, and we're expanding professional services. There's such a huge gap in customer awareness of what pharmacy does. So I think any opportunity you have to lead a customer into a conversation and basically market what you're doing with your business is fantastic. But that can only happen if that junior that only works on Saturdays has been part of that communication and is on board and along for the ride.
Yeah, fantastic. And, you said right at the top of that, communication, it's a word that's, been flogged to death. And I think you're 100% right. But where you drilled that down into is, I guess, some really cool components about, why we're doing it is important to communicate. And this is what I speak to a lot of people about. We can say, we've got to communicate more. But what? What and how are we communicating to these staff? So, we can tell them, yeah, we're putting in a robot, we're refitting the straw. That's not enough. There's still lots of fear and uncertainty. Where do I fit into that?
Yes.
How does the patient fit into that? And, you spoke about even the most junior staff being able to have that conversation with the customer that only comes in on a Saturday. That's even able to improve the certainty of the patient as well. So it's not that they're redesigning the shop and I'm not going to be welcome here, or it's going to be shutting down while they actually pull this all apart. There's lots of different elements to that as well. So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is about really communicating why they're doing it in the first place, how it's going to happen, how people are going to be impacted and also elevated as well in their roles, how it's going to make their lives better. And then what it's going to look like as well, as opposed to just starting with what it's going to look like and what's going to happen, and then leaving everyone to their own devices to kind of figure out the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. So that why is really important. And I think the owners, the managers, the leaders in these businesses, they get a lot of the why from, attending events and networking and speaking to their peers that have their own businesses in other suburbs, interstate and whatnot. But I think the why doesn't get communicated effectively enough, and that's a really important it's a really important factor, because I think a lot of the messaging at the moment in the industry is like, well, particularly over the last few months, like, 60-day dispensing, it's a bit of a worry, what's going to happen? And there has been a bit of concern, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity and a lot of positive things, on the horizon for the industry. So the why should be around the positivity and the opportunities. And we're doing this because, we want to create a better place to work, a better place for our patients to come. And patient experience, customer experience, call it what you want, is such an important factor for any business in any industry. So,
yeah. And I suppose also with the why and having the owners clear on their why that is beyond, having seen something super cool at a conference or whatever, is also really important in essence to you being able to do your role effectively as well. And you said that before, something along the lines of that, not every pharmacy is the same, so there should be nuances as well. I have this saying when I'm teaching kids how to ride, is that, I might have a Ferrari in the driveway, but it doesn't mean I know how to drive it. And I see that, in your case,
Absolutely.
You might be able to build the Ferrari of a pharmacy, but it doesn't mean that the staff know how to utilize it effectively, it doesn't mean that it's fit for purpose for the patients that are coming in, or even the business model that is there. So I guess my next question is we've spoken about in the process of setting up and redesigning the importance of communication and outlining the objectives of the over and having that infiltrate right down to the most junior members. What other components do you see as important to making sure, I guess, the space is utilized the way it's intended as well? Or what impact does that have on a redesign as well?
Yeah, look, I think resourcing is a really big one.
Tell me more about that word, resourcing. Sorry to interrupt.
Pardon?
Tell me more about that word, resourcing. Explain that to me.
I guess it's having the right people to put in the right places within that space that you've designed. So I'll give you an example. Probably 3-4 years ago, speaking to one particular owner who really wanted to do more with consult rooms and had a bit of a funny shape of the pharmacy. And they said at the time, I think we sort of need more consult rooms. Anyway, crux of it is we ended up putting more consult rooms in. But in the early stage of the conversation, we had a lot of discussion before we sort of launched into the design about, well, it's all good and well to say you want consult rooms, but what are you actually going to do with them? And do you have the people to fill them? Do you have the services to put and run in those consult rooms? Because I've also seen people put consult rooms in and then they end up being a bit of storage, or you see the shopping trolley with a bit of cardboard that needs to go out to recycling. I mean, we've all seen it, and probably most of us have done it in places that we've worked, right? So, I'll put my hand up for that one.
Yep.
So I think, again, I sort of said putting the Tetris piece together and all the many layers, creating a space, but then making sure that you can actually utilize and maximize the benefits of that space. And ultimately, you need people. You need people with the right skills. You need to have an idea of what services you're going to run. Are they actually right for the community that you're serving? That's another big thing. So I think I don't know how I've sort of digressed away from the question, but that sort of, I think, is kind of the things that I see then make the space work successfully or not. And again, communicating, letting your customers, patients, community that you serve know that that's what you're doing now, because that's another, if you need another podcast topic, that's another passion of mine, actually letting patients know what pharmacies provide. That's a really big one. You can't just build it and assume they will come. You need to build it and tell people what they can come now for. Yeah,
beautiful. And again, I can see how that ties back into, even while it's happening, such a great segue to being able to tell your staff, tell your patients about this as well.
Yeah, huge.
So when I was also asking about what can we do to optimize the effective use of these workspaces, you mentioned about having the right staff in there. So I'm hearing training. The other thing that you haven't mentioned at the moment, but I'm just curious to get your input on, is systems as well. So do you have any recommendations around reviewing systems when redesign goes in, or what should be communicated to staff about the potential new workflows? I would assume new workflows if there's redesign going in.
So can you just elaborate a little bit more what you mean by systems, like software platforms?
Great. It highlights the importance of language. Hey, you use the word resources and I think paper, I say systems and you think software. When I say systems, I'm also talking about procedures.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, workflow procedures, I guess. So you spoke about script intake before. If script intake has been done by the same staff member for the last 10 years in exactly the same way, I could see that it's potentially going to end up being trying to put, a square peg in a round hole if they're trying to do it the old way and we've redesigned it to something new. So what do we need to look at in terms of systems, of workflows, procedures, and what needs to be communicated or should be communicated if we're going to optimize these new redesigns?
Yeah, look, I think that's, and your example of scripting is actually a good one, because it's sort of, it's processes and it's tech together when we talk about systems, because what have we done? And then how is the process now how do we need to change the process to accommodate the new? And I think things like, if we use prescriptions as an example, the advent of e-scripts and how popular that's become, and thinking about when we talk about, okay, how many scripts encounters do you need? We also talk about, how do your scripts actually come into the pharmacy at the moment? Because there's now multiple channels, and it's also something that I know in the early days, and probably still spoke to a number of pharmacists that, it's so confusing now, like people used to come in and say, I've got a script I need to pick up, and you say, have you dropped it in or is it on file? And it was pretty straightforward. And now it's like, have you sent it via this app? Have you sent it via email? Have you got it here on file? Have you got it in digital copy? Have you, there's like 6 questions you need to ask them. So also understanding, again, it's not a one size fits all. What is happening in that pharmacy? What has the trend been with some of the changes that we see? What way does the process need to perhaps be changed to better meet those changes? And then what do we need from a physical aspect in that space to actually support that? So again, if I sort of continue on this script example, do we have 1 or 2 areas where customers can drop in prescriptions, or patients? I know I use the word a little bit interchangeably. Drop in a prescription or talk to a staff member and request a, on file or whatnot. But then if there's been a large uptake, particularly for that pharmacy, of digitally submitted prescriptions that are submitted externally, do we also need to factor that there needs to be a resource who is regularly checking and responsible for picking up and dispensing those in another area? Speak to pharmacists and say, we have a pharmacist that comes in half an hour before we open, because we always have a lot of accumulation of digitally sent through scripts by, like a med advisor or something like that. So thinking about, where does that happen? Who's required in the pharmacy to process that, and so forth. So I hope that sort of answered.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a sort of, again, got off a little bit off tangent.
No, and it's perfect. And I'm really enjoying listening to you think far beyond the mechanics of the space, because I must admit, even when we first started this conversation, when I see about design and workflow, I was really thinking around the mechanics about how does something get from A to B. And, that is workflow at the end of the day. Yeah. But when you talk about resources, who, I also term staff, and those human components to these design models, they're such a critical feature that A, the design's not going to work without it, but B, it makes the design seem much more human focused as well, which from my perspective makes a much more inviting proposition than just, I guess, a sterile workplace. Marta, I'm interested. You mentioned before about the importance around being able to communicate to patients what we do, but also I see it as being able to identify, where their gaps are, and then being able to identify how, or when I say gaps, their services, their needs that they have, and how pharmacists and pharmacies, how we can meet those needs, and are probably already meeting them, but they're just unaware of it at the moment. I'm just wondering if we took that concept and just went back one step and talked about our internal customers, our staff, and thinking about this whole redesign process, do you find any benefit, or do you find any improvement in uptake when there is discussions between the owner and the staff about their pain points, their gaps or their confusions, and what would make their life easier. Do you find if those conversations happen, it improves engagement or optimizes the outcomes at the opposite end?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say absolutely, but to a degree. And
Yep.
the reason I say that is I find it's really valuable to get the broader team's input, and in some cases where it's been perhaps a more complex project or the owner sort of requested off the back of a few conversations, we've actually gone in and almost had little mini interviews with some of the key staff and said, okay, so, if you could change this, what would you do? Just pretend money's no object. What would make your life easier and what works for you and what doesn't work for you? Because it's quite interesting. Sometimes it also depends on whether the owner is present often in the business or just sort of floats in and out if they have multiple sites, which sometimes can happen. But sometimes, it's all about perception, isn't it? What a person from one part of the business sees as being problems and challenges. Sometimes the staff, and I try and encourage them to be really open when I have the opportunity to have these conversations, saying, I'm not going to quote and say, Chantelle told me this. It's really just to help us understand as much as possible about what happens day to day. And the staff sometimes are, great at opening up and say, everyone thinks this is the problem, but I'm doing it here every day. And if only this part got fixed, it would actually solve X, Y, and Z as a result of that. So that can be really helpful and really insightful. And I have found maybe less so in design projects because we do that to a degree, but maybe not quite as in depth. We've done some consulting projects more around changing workflows and improving operations without the design, where that component of those confidential staff interviews to try and draw out where the bugbears are, it forms a big part of that research part of that project. But what you'll often find is that you get some key themes. So if you speak to 6 people in a business and say, well, what do you think? And front of shop staff, back of house staff, admin staff, dispensary staff, etc., there'll be a couple of themes that get drawn out, which sometimes align with what the owner is saying, or sometimes not quite. But you can see then why the owner feels there's a problem, because then 6 people have said, well, actually, this is where the issue is, and we see it day to day. So that's really important and insightful. And I say not always. I said that at the start is because sometimes having 10 people on a meeting, everyone giving their opinion, you find it really stalls the progress of a project because everyone will want their 2 cents worth. And I think it's, you can never satisfy everyone 100%.
No.
So it's finding that happy medium. But I have seen, again, the good examples of great managers, great leaders, great business owners that we've worked, for example, my team and the partners of the business have worked together. We've got it to a point. We've run through like presenting our philosophies on how the design has come to be, meeting the objectives of the partners, et cetera, and they've gone, yep, we're happy with that. We're going to now take it to our staff update meeting. So again, the ones that communicate well. And we're going to brainstorm this and, we're going to come back to you with any sort of key standout things that come in. So they kind of act as a bit of a filter. And I think that from my observations, those processes have worked really well because it keeps the staff engaged. They're informed. Everyone has an opportunity to speak their mind and put ideas forward. There's a little bit of a filter and those expectations of what realistically can be achieved and what can't is managed by the leaders and the owners. And then we get some of the feedback from that filtered feedback that we go back and go, oh, cool, yeah, look, fair point. We didn't think about that. That's great feedback. We'll make a bit of an adjustment. Because ultimately we do site inspections, we do, these discussions with the team, but we're only seeing like the tip of the iceberg. We don't work in the business. We try as best as possible to immerse ourselves, but we don't. So we're reliant on that feedback. But yes, I do preface that with sometimes, what's the saying? Too many cooks spoils the
Yeah,
pot. You can get a bit of nowhere, a bit of a stalemate. So
yeah. And and that's a really important point to raise. And you said, about the communication skills of the good leaders, the good owners, the good managers, can help to temper expectations as well. It is our role as owners, managers, leaders to be able to set the agenda, but then also allow opportunity for impact or insight or feedback in a container as well, that kind of puts a few parameters around it, which makes it a little bit more I guess realistic for you to work with, but also, as I said, tempers expectations of staff as well, because it's one thing to say, oh, let's have all of this feedback and then dismiss it. That doesn't
That's
leave
right.
feeling anyone more empowered. It makes them feel that they haven't been cared for or they haven't been considered. But
Absolutely.
by being able to, be clear on, thank you for the feedback, this is possible because, or this is not possible because, allows them to know they've been heard, and also addresses reasons why not it can occur too.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think you particularly made about asking for feedback and then saying, well, we can't do any of that. So I think you've got to be careful with, these are the constraints and boundaries. What feedback do you have that, within our boundaries we can address?
Yeah. So look, we've covered a lot of ground. From my perspective, what I'm hearing through all this is that, design and refits are really only one piece of this Tetris puzzle. It's the physical component, but we've got to pair that with the owner's objectives, what the store's objectives are, and where they're heading for the future. And then figure out how we're going to pair that with the resources that are within the business as well. The staff, the knowledge that exists there, and what can be adjusted or repurposed in some ways around, that's going to support the redesign or the optimization of the pharmacy. The other thing I've also heard, and I'm really happy to hear, is that it sounds like even if you have the best design, the thing that's going to make this really sing is some clear leadership and involvement of the team as well, and keeping them engaged throughout. So I guess I want to shift on to the last question that I ask everyone. And that is, I am building a leaders toolbox for pharmacists and pharmacies. And I'm just curious, if you had to put one tool in, what would it be?
And I know you sent me this question, I'm giving it away to the audience, before our podcast. And the first thing that came to mind, and now that we're wrapping up this conversation, I think it just, to me, reiterates it's still the thing that I'd suggest is that communication piece, and communication to the team, communication to your patients, and I guess any other stakeholders that engage with your business. So communication.
Fantastic. I'm glad you didn't say AutoCAD.
No.
No, and I completely agree. And thank you so much for breaking down what communication is in this particular context. It's really important about why we are doing it, how it's going to be implemented, how everyone's going to be affected, influenced, or, have their jobs maybe adjusted or optimized, and then what it's going to look like at the end. It's not just about, we're making this refit, we're making this redesign, we're reconfiguring or adding on some extra consult rooms. There's a lot more to the communication, and I think it's been really important, even for me, to really understand what should be being communicated to our staff to make sure that these, labor intensive and also, financially large investments can be optimized and utilized to, improve our teams and also the outcomes for our patients in our pharmacies as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time today. If anyone does need some assistance with their workflows or design optimization, I do recommend that you reach out to Marta, and she will definitely help you out. So is there anything else to add, Marta? Otherwise, I think this is a fantastic place to end today.
No, that's all. And thank you so much again for having the opportunity to chat with you, Chantelle. I really enjoyed it, and I hope the listeners out there got some value out of it as well. So thank you very much.
Well, I certainly did. So thank you. Thanks for joining us today on the Pharmacy View podcast. And don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment if you found this episode of value or have feedback. Podcast episodes are promoted through social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, and major podcast mediums. And each episode can be found on the Pharmacy View webpage with links to guest contact and business details. If you're a pharmacist or industry support supplier who would like to join us on an episode, send us a message through LinkedIn or complete an inquiry form on the Pharmacy View webpage. I am your host, Chantelle Turner, pharmacist, leadership coach, and founder of Turn Pharmacy Leadership. And on behalf of Shopfront Solutions and Arion Technologies, thanks again for joining us today on the Pharmacy View podcast.